Okay, let's see if this is recording. Looks like it. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the World Qualitative Research Conference and the organizing committee, in particular, Fabio Freitas and Sonia Mendez, for the opportunity to speak with you all today. My name is Dr. Anna Cohen-Miller, and today we'll have a chance to discuss how equity and inclusion can help us become better qualitative researchers. So if you've been to any of my other talks before, keynotes or classes, workshops, anything in the past, you'll know that the sessions allow us a chance to pause, to reflect, and to interact also. So in this session, I draw from my recent textbook with Routledge, Questions in Qualitative Social Justice Research in Multicultural Contexts, along with Moderator Boivin. We highlight the potential of critical self-reflection in socially just qualitative research, and the session then as such will appeal to those across levels and stages of research, whether in the planning phases of the research project, currently conducting a study, or in sharing findings and advocacy. Through then a purposeful application of critical self-reflection, I suggest that it's possible for qualitative researchers to prioritize social justice, moving from researching on participants and communities to researching with participants and communities. And so through these approaches, then, the questions posed here can be used as part of a growing toolbox for becoming better qualitative researchers. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in. And we're going to take a pause for a contemplative inquiry practice. So I mentioned these chances to pause, right, to reflect, but why? So the way that I think about it is that it's a tool for research and also pedagogy. It connects to the framework, such as connected to the book that I mentioned. So let's see a bit more about contemplative research practice. It encourages us, for instance, to become more aware and open, as Valerie Janicek notes, to deepen our attention and learning, as Kakali Bhattacharya explains, and to recognize the potential of critical self-awareness for qualitative social justice research, a foundation for this book. And so what we're going to be doing, if y'all are up for it, we're going to take a moment and we're going to actually pause. We're going to pause here together and we're going to close our eyes. And I'm going to go ahead and do it with you also. I'm going to plant my feet on the floor. If you can also, you can do that. And I'm actually going to play a little bit of background music. Let's see if this will work. Okay. So we're all zooming in here. We're taking a deep breath in and out. And I want us to imagine that while we're in different countries, different cities, different rooms, different computers, let's think about us all in the same space. Take another deep breath in and out. Imagine that we're at the conference together, face to face. That we would look around, would see one another, would have an opportunity to learn, to grow, to feel the energy from one another. One more deep breath. And out. Thank you for all who worked on that and for being here today. So becoming better qualitative researchers, you can ask yourself, what does better mean to me? How can I get there? So the questions, maybe you've asked yourself before. Have you ever wondered, are you taking the right steps in working with participants and communities? Have you ever wondered if you have enough participants? Or maybe have you built enough trust in the research for participants and communities to be open with you? So these questions, among others, are excellent ways to assess ourselves, the quality and the rigor of our work, and our commitment to conducting socially just qualitative research. So back to these questions, right? What does better mean to me? What does it mean to you? How can I get there? We can consider the essential role of critical self-reflection, self-awareness, as growth as socially just researchers. So I'll be explaining, and you probably already have an idea of what I consider better qualitative research for me. So let's look at our journey today. So our journey already started. We had a contemplative inquiry. We breathed. There's various different forms of doing this. I also like brain dumps, where you just write down everything that's on your mind, like a free write, and separate it so we can be more purposeful and in this moment. Then we're going to move into setting the international stage, discussing positionality, critical self-reflection, self-awareness, unpacking some key topics of equity and inclusion in qualitative research. And I'll bring in some example studies, reflective questions, and insights throughout. Feel free to write in the chat if you'd like. I'm going to be integrating pauses for you to think and reflect, to take the chance to breathe. Think critically about your current or future work, past research. If you have a piece of paper, you can use it. You can write down your ideas. You can use your computer, your phone, whatever works for you. This is your chance to learn deeper, and together we are growing as a community. So the questions I pose here in the activities then are tools that can be used over and again, tips that I've developed and learned throughout my career to date, in particular from working and collaborating with others and learning from our collective knowledge about socially just qualitative research. So creating our learning space, just a real quick pause here to recognize that this is a moment that we can consider. This works for teaching and for research. We're entering this space. The ideal situation is we want to create a safe space for everyone involved. We come together with a collective purpose and work to be open, respectful of all voices, growing in awareness, and leaving judgment at the door to learn together, hearing each other's voices and experience. So setting the stage internationally. So quickly, I want to show you where I'm zooming in from. I'm out in Kazakhstan, so you can see out in the middle of Asia then. And then you see Portugal, and you see, I know other people are zooming in from other places in the Philippines and across the world. And I like the yellow line, at least between Kazakhstan and Portugal, showing that really there's a way for us to connect. And so even on the map, you can see that we're coming together. So here you get an overview of some of the funding that I've been involved in. So to give you a bit of a background of where I'm coming from, broadening concepts of qualitative social justice research, I've been thinking about being better, such as with Horizon 2020, Erasmus, UNDP, British Academy, some initiatives I've started and lead, such as the Consortium of Gender Scholars, textbook on qualitative social justice research, multicultural contexts with Routledge, and working here today. So let's take a moment and consider, who am I, right? So who are you? Reflexivity then is a chance for an iterative process of seeing our positionality. You can ask yourself, what has informed who I am? What do others see when they look at me? Am I an insider, outsider, somewhere in between in my research? And why are knowing these things important for research? So who am I? Here's a professional introduction. This is one way that you might see an introduction, a fairly typical one, right? So I'm a scholar, an advocate of equity and inclusion in higher education. I focus on arts-based methods, approximately 20 years of teaching, curriculum development, training and research methods. I'm a faculty member in Central Asia. I'm then also a mother scholar, a leader, a mentor, an advocate, and I have some sample projects. So this crosses over a little bit from professional into a personal, but I want to show you even then going a bit further. So this tells you who I've said that I am, right? But where does that come from? So considering then where does it come from? We can look at these ideas of the cultural iceberg. Maybe you've heard of the cultural iceberg. I'll show you. So some questions to ask. How does the cultural iceberg relate to my positionality and to the potential for becoming a better qualitative researcher? So let's look at this one image. So here's this idea, and this I first learned in an anthropology class years ago, that if you think of an iceberg, you have this bit coming out of the water, and that's the surface culture. We can look and we look around, oh, this person is tall or short, this person is eating that kind of food or wearing that, listening to this music. But it doesn't tell you about them, about the deep culture, right? What is the society? What is the understanding of, we say, the implicit aspects of culture What are the values and belief, behaviors, ethics, aspects of time, aspects of interactions? What is accepted or not, and how has that evolved and changed? So seeing below the surface, I'm going to read to you now positionality statement that's in the book, and this goes below the surface. So if you were to look at me from appearances, you might say that I'm white, or maybe a Hispanic woman. To understand more, you could talk with me, learn where I grew up, see my identity, and perhaps how I developed my social justice, inclusion, and equity lenses. I am a Sephardic, Spanish, Jewish, cisgender woman. I pass as white in the US, but often felt like an outsider, having to prove to others who I was. I was frequently the only Jewish student in my class or workplace, and regularly faced hearing, seeing, and experiencing discrimination. My history extends to the Spanish Inquisition, where stories were frequently told about our ancestors who had to flee the Iberian Peninsula for fear of their lives as refugees. Another part of my family is also connected to oppression, fleeing persecution in Germany, Hungary, and Russia. Concerns over our safety and well-being about being different were and are realities. Today, I am a mother of 2 young children. I speak Spanish to them, and we have raised them Jewish. We live in Kazakhstan in Central Asia, and we're exposed to Kazakh and Russian languages and over 100 nationalities in the country. These historical memories and current realities have led to my commitment to addressing issues of equity, inclusion, and social justice, and to the writing of this book. So what about you? Remember these questions? What has informed who I am? What do other people see when they look at me? Am I an insider, outsider, somewhere in between? And then why are knowing these important for qualitative research to becoming better? So speaking of insider and outsider, I use the term the spectrum of insider-outsiderness. I want to give you an example from one of our contributors to the chapter on the spectrum of insider-outsiderness, from Linda Toohey Weiss-Smith. She talks about insiderness like this. And she's the founder, in case you don't know, of decolonial methods focusing on Indigenous communities. She says, there's nothing like building a wall or barbed wire fence to keep people in or out that tells a story about the visible and invisible territorial power of borders and boundaries. Escaping over or under or passing through these borders signifies some kind of transition, not just of the physical body, but of the ontological process of changing identity of sense of being. Those visible borders are easy to identify. However, there are many borders less obvious and more subtle in the ways they appear. There are epistemic borders, disciplinary borders, institutional borders, and linguistic and psychological borders. There are borders between categories of reality and fantasy, truth and lies, spirit and body, all of which are socially constructed and reinforced through institutional power. Indigenous researchers often work along the edges of these kinds of borders, work that has marked my career. So thinking about your own borders, these same questions reflected again, right? Are you taking the right steps? Am I taking the right steps, right? In quotation marks. Do I have enough participants? Have I built enough trust? Where am I on this insider-outsider spectrum? And how does that affect my research? So what's at the center of becoming a better qualitative researcher? I say that there's 2 basic ideas: becoming aware of ourselves and others, working together with communities. So again, what does better mean to you? Let's try a practice of increasing awareness. So here we go. You can see the still life here. Let's take a moment. And what do you see? You can think to yourself, you can type it in the chat, right? Write it down. How many items do you see? And what are they? Okay, here's another angle. Looking at the same still life, another perspective. What are you able to see and understand? What do you see now? What number of items? And what are they? And now another angle. What do you see? What's different, if anything? So this is what qualitative research can do. We can focus on unpacking what is there. What do we need to understand more of? I talk about unpacking issues of equity and inclusion, that we have a chance to listen to people that haven't been heard, to amplify voices, work with students, whether it's teachers, practitioners, other stakeholders, communities, to address the needs that have been hidden from view. If this was a workshop, we could chat about all of these aspects, and I do look forward to hearing from y'all. And if you didn't already get my website and email, please reach out later where I will show it again. So what part of the whole am I able to see and understand? Questions that we can ask ourselves. What part of the community am I seeing as a researcher? Where am I missing understanding, voices and insights? And yet that's hard to see, right? Like if you're missing something, like in that first image, what were you missing? You didn't know. So how might I become more aware and working with the community? In this case, with the still life, it was about changing angle. And it could be as literal as that, right? Going into the school, into the community in a different way, in a different literal entrance, or talking to different people, asking their insights for how you can continue to iteratively improve and become a better researcher. One which, for me, means about being more equitable and more inclusive and socially just. So defining some key terms then. So I talked about reflection, critical self-reflection. This is a tool for equity and inclusion, but what's the difference between self-reflection and critical self-reflection? And what's the purpose of using it in our research? And when can I use it? Take a few seconds. Okay. So here's one definition of critical self-reflection. Critical self-reflection in qualitative research emphasizes reflecting on our work to purposefully become better researchers. Through such a reflective process, we have an opportunity to look at ourselves and our work. The process offers a chance to set aside judgment, become aware of where we are and where we want to go to move our research and practice in a constructive and beneficial direction. A quote from John Dewey, a well-known educational leader. He said, "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." So what topics are useful to critically self-reflect about in research? What about relationships, power, partnerships? You can put things in chat also. Maybe you have some ideas here. See if you can guess what I'm going to say next. Voice, trust, vulnerability, language, ethics. So adding in equity and inclusion. What do you think about when you hear equity and inclusion in qualitative research? Can you come up with an example? I'm going to pause for a few seconds to give you a chance to think. Okay, what do equity and inclusion feel and look like? So I recently heard a speech from an intersectional feminist, Tara Robertson from the Public Knowledge Project. She discussed accessibility, diversity, and inclusion in organizations. She engaged the audience in thinking about a time when they felt particularly welcomed and included in the workplace. Her talk stood out to me in helping me to identify what it feels like to be included, to have my voice matter, and on the other side, what it felt like to be overlooked, ignored, and not seen. So I want you to think for a moment. When have you felt included? What did it feel like to be included, to be welcomed, to the table, right? To be included, whether that's as a student, as a child, as an adult, on a research team perhaps, or in some other way, maybe as part of family. What exactly made you feel included and on equal footing with others? So here's one set of definitions. So equity, I say, refers to being provided with equal opportunity and support in all segments of society, including both support and also fairness and equal outcomes. Inclusion is the practice or policy of including all, providing opportunities for those who otherwise would be marginalized. So now let's connect in social justice. What does it mean to be more socially just in research? How would you define it? And each of these questions, right, when you think about it, they're going to change over time, right? My own definition of equity will continue to adapt. Better will continue to adapt. Social justice will continue to adapt. For instance, I'm now recognizing the importance of integrating ecological justice when I think about justice in the world. So social justice and research is the purposeful commitment and advocacy to address systemic and systematic issues of equity and inclusion, in particular for marginalized and oppressed peoples. So in other words, social justice research can address inequities by actively engaging all participants, all of whom who have a stake in the research, will be affected by it, bringing them to the forefront of the discussion. This type of research can help unpack historical and current systems of injustice, and instead places the center of our work, the essential nature of working, hearing, and amplifying the voices of diverse sets of communities, especially those who have been historically marginalized, overlooked, or oppressed. So this has a lot of power in it, right? So as a researcher, right, I'm trying to say, oh, I'm going to amplify voices. And that centers me in research, which can both be useful, right? I'm bringing other voices, but what is my power? It's important that I know what it is so I don't abuse it. I continue to look at it and see where I am in the research. So I say that the power in research is a missing link in equity and inclusion equation. And we need to negotiate and mediate our own power. So what does it mean? What does negotiate and mediate power for you? This is how I discuss it. Negotiating and mediating our power. Negotiating our power as a researcher is an ongoing process of critical self-reflection to understand ourselves relating to those we work with. Mediating our power as a research is an iterative process, one that occurs again and again to try to reduce adverse effects of an imbalance of power. Some of the work as well, for instance, of Norma Rahm, where she talks about this relational inquiry and how the importance of going to the community and coming back. So I can try to negotiate and look within myself, but without that connection to the community and understanding my effect on them and theirs on me, then I won't be able to move forward productively and in socially just ways. So what comes to mind when you hear researching with instead of on? So I mentioned this at the very beginning, right? That I focus on researching with communities, researching with participants. This could be a topic of an entire workshop, by the way. So researching with, here are some ideas. Researching with participants means that we recognize the value that every person, participant, practitioner, community brings. It means that we do not assume that we know best about participants' lives, experiences, or words. It means we return to the community to continue to understand more and engage better. It offers a means to understand how to be ethical in our research with others. So power and critical reflection and qualitative research. So here we're looking, so what are some critical self-reflective questions we can use in thinking about our power? You can think about your data collection, the participants, the community you're working with, and ask yourself, who has power? How do you know? How would you define or classify the types of power? Again, these are things that are important for me to return to, because as I start to understand the community more, the participants I'm working with, I understand more, just like that still life image, right? I'm looking at another perspective and I can see more and understand more. So owning my power, this is a chapter in the book, and this is a brief snippet, an excerpt from Kakali Bhattacharya, scholar of contemplative inquiry and qualitative research. And so she contributed a reflection from the field where she's talking about owning my power. She says, when I think of owning our power, I do not think of power that comes with rank, money, or visibility, and or other external indicators. Instead, for me, power is internal, imaginal, that manifests outwardly in external relations and practices. So when we think about our research, we can think about what works, what doesn't. The key here that I find, and with those that I work with, especially early career researchers, is to remember that no research is perfect and that that's okay, right? We're not looking for a perfect in the box, predetermined way of doing something, because people change, interactions change, and we want to be flexible and adaptable to the situations. So there's various ways that we can uncover potential solutions to work with participants and communities. So we can think about solutions for mediating our power, leading to better and more inclusive and equitable research. For instance, questions like, how can we include those in research who do not speak our language or express themselves in the same way we do? How can we include young children who may have limited verbal capabilities? How can we include those from other marginalized or oppressed groups whose voices have been historically overlooked and ignored? And sometimes, like I've found, I don't realize that I'm speaking a different language, that I have been working, for instance, on an international research project on gender and higher education with people in the UK and in Nigeria, Morocco, and India. And we realized, it took actually a few months, so we realized that some of the terms that we're using were different. We thought we were on the same page. One group of people use the term, whereas I use the term staff, and other people use the term staff to refer to administration. Thankfully, we're in a collaborative team focused actually on integrating feminist transdisciplinary research, which for us means coming together and respecting one another in collaborative ways, that we were able to adjust and recognize these differences and move forward. So here's one solution for becoming a better researcher, more equitable and inclusive in research. One potential way, I say, is body mapping. So participatory research or participatory action research can be used where participants draw about an idea or concept, which allows for an additional modality that de-emphasizes solely the use of verbal language. For instance, Linda Liebenberg has talked about this on art solicitation. In this example, I conducted a study of Kazakh cultural values with a graduate class. We started the study as part of a course that I taught on innovative research methods. Body mapping shown here allowed the students to become researchers, where they created scenarios and stories that reflected their reality and understanding and experiences of Kazakh cultural values, and then drawing them on life-size papers. Working with two of the graduate students who are now alumni, Aygul Rakesheva and Nurligul Smat, we presented on the topic and wrote an article that's under review about the pedagogy of body mapping, the potential for the research practice to highlight the voices of students and to address sensitive topics. So one particular opportunity and challenge has been facing the experiences and understanding what's going on during COVID, right? The continuing aspect and how it is affecting people. How can we become better researchers during this time? And while we've been talking about power and thinking about how that affects our research, I now want to move into the concept of trust. So trust offers an opportunity to establish and nourish a belief in research, especially when investigating marginalized and diverse communities. Trust is composed of parts creating the notion of someone or something as being trustworthy, not just the connection one has with people. So integrating trust and critical self-reflection, questions that we can ask ourselves when going into the field and throughout the research. How are you building trust? And what type of trust are you developing? Where could you expand your trustworthiness in concrete ways? How can participants trust that the impact of our study will not affect them negatively? And how can we ethically create trust with communities whose linguistic, religious, ethnic, or cultural practices differ from ours, from the researchers? So here's one solution. One solution to better understand, say, integration of participant-created arts as co-researchers, in this case, photovoice. Trust was central for this study on photovoice, which explored the experiences of rural school children during distance learning in Kazakhstan. So I worked with Gulnaz Kordanova, who's one of my thesis students, and she is researching the digital divide and learning loss during what ended up being 11 months of online learning in Kazakhstan, one of the longest in the world, where over 300,000 students were even without internet in the country. The photos were created by participants to show their experience and describe them. So Gulnaz collected this data and she's leading the research, right? This is her thesis project. And she shared from one of her participants. So there's an image on the left where it's an escalator. She says, the participant said, "First, I didn't even understand what was happening. I felt isolated and the same things kept happening every day. As an escalator, I felt like everything was going down. But then I found my interests besides school, and that helped me to uplift myself." And a student shared a photo of her sleeping. "I used to wake up, message a plus sign to show the teachers that I'm present, and then go back to sleep. I didn't have enough feedback from teachers and didn't know if my work mattered." So with the lack of internet, a lot of the teaching happened through WhatsApp, happened through texting. And while I mentioned escalator, there was also discussion of an elevator, and so going down, right? So another version of photovoice, solutions for conducting more equitable and inclusive research. This was an asynchronous online photovoice study. So an arts-based method where participants became researchers. In this study, mothers in academia took photos of their experience of being in lockdown or quarantine during the first wave of the COVID pandemic. Working with a PhD student, Zhana Ijakenova, we've presented on adapting photovoice online and the unique experiences of this population, highlighting the overlooked experience with the aim to advocate for more equitable and inclusive practices in higher education. And so I talked about this format, also adapting photovoice for both online and also asynchronous, because participants didn't have the time to sit down and talk and be in a workshop or even online for videos. So this one participant mentions of her photo. She says, "Daughter sitting on my kitchen table looking at my computer screen while I tried to open my laptop for a quick moment." So that was the description of her photo. And then explains it. She says, "Curls are beautiful." And what a metaphor. It represents how even if I try a little to work, she's always there and always first priority. And she's so curious and fun. I love both being a mother and being a professor. I'm trying. And then as an example of what is it that we need to do to improve life for mothers in academia, she says, "Acknowledge and accommodate for parents doing full-time child raising during a pandemic. We are here. We need family-friendly policy." And these are some screenshots from the project. So this is now online. You can find it at photovoicemotherscholars.wordpress.com. So solution to become a better researcher. We've moved on from power to trust. Now we can look at voice. Participant voice, questions that can be asked before going into the field and continuing, right, as this form of relational inquiry. Whose voices are we prioritizing? Why? What context? What are the benefits and detriments to these decisions? So expanding social justice through transformational research. This is one of the chapters in the book, and also an excerpt about voice. So from Donna Mertens, founder of Transformational Methods, She explains that members of the deaf community challenged me to develop an approach to research that was culturally responsive and focused on providing a foundation for constructive action to transform a world in which they experience discrimination and oppression on a regular basis. So becoming culturally responsive to the needs of the community. We can ask ourselves, for instance, regarding voice, if we're transcribing a conversation, interviews, what will I do if a participant shares their experience with language that's not grammatical? How am I justifying my decision? Am I correcting the grammar? Am I not? Why? What will the potential result be for audiences that read this, for the participant who reads it? In what ways may my questions have been misunderstood or misinterpreted? How can I adjust for that in the future? So a solution for equity and inclusion in schools, arts-based research speaking to student well-being, and in this case in Kazakhstan. You can see a drawing, this one completed by a middle schooler in an area of the country known for its pollution and high rates of alcoholism. This is a case where the educational gap and digital divide is also quite evident. This was part of an arts-based focus group that I developed for a multi-year study with the University of Cambridge and British Council to understand student well-being, speaking to underlying wicked problems, as we say, these ones that need to be looked at from multiple perspectives, disciplinary aspects, issues such as hunger, pollution, right? How do we address educational access for all? In this case, wicked problems of teen suicide, where young men in Kazakhstan have one of the highest rates in the world. The image shows aspects they consider good about school and their life and those that are problems. The arts, in this case also, showing the two different sides, things that are positive in the mind of these children, these students, and things that are hard. These allowed opportunities to elicit conversation and for the students to better voice their experience and their insights. So creating connections then between topics, from power to trust, voice, vulnerability, relationships. How can we work to allow and facilitate other people's own voices without inadvertently imposing our own prejudices, authority, and power on another set of people? I'm going to take a little pause here for you to take this in and to write down any notes or to think about some thoughts that may have come to you. Ten more seconds. Okay, great. So we're getting to the end then, right? Wrapping things up. We can think about takeaways of becoming this better qualitative researcher. First, I wonder, right? Do you have your definition of better yet? What is better for you? So in these three major categories, talking about awareness and responsiveness to the communities, open and aware and responsive to our ideas and those of others for research and pedagogical practice, equity and inclusion, integrating critical self-reflection in an iterative fashion to create and conduct more equitable and inclusive research. For instance, what worked well? There's always going to be something, right, that worked well. And there's always going to be something that can be improved. What could be improved? What didn't work so well? That's okay, right? We can move forward through this. Once we can acknowledge that there was a problem, then we can actually adjust for it and move forward. And social justice. Becoming socially just researchers is a constant process interrelating to essential concepts of positionality, power, language, talked about voice, trust, and many other aspects as well. But those are key concepts. And if we can keep these in mind, we're becoming more aware, we're working towards greater equity and inclusion, ultimately to become more socially just, more just in general, ecologically just, and thinking about how we can move forward as individual researchers, and collectively, we're going to move things, we're going to change things, and it's going to improve, at least hopefully, right? Because we have our collective knowledge here and we can. So they say, wow, that was a lot, right? Way to go, you did it, we got through it. A lot of information, a lot of things to think about, a lot of questions that you can take away with you. So I say, what are your key takeaways, right? So I talked about awareness, equity, inclusion, social justice. What are yours? Is there something else that came to mind? Something else personal to you, to your own research, your own ideas, how it is that you might want to do something differently in the future with one another, something that really stood out, maybe that worked really well that you'd like to share with others, whether here or in another format. So as a final question then, we can ask, how do we as qualitative, socially justice-minded researchers find our path forward in an increasingly diverse, multicultural world? What I suggest then is a simple response. We take it step by step and we see what we can learn from others and where our growing awareness and critical self-reflection can enhance qualitative inquiry and social justice. Thank you so much for coming out today, from Zooming in from wherever you are around the world, for taking this time. It has been so great to spend this session with you. I look forward to seeing you at other sessions as well. Thank you for the opportunity to connect. Please feel free to reach out at any point, whether you have ideas for collaboration, questions, thoughts, comments around working to move qualitative research community towards more equitable, more inclusive, and more socially just inquiry. Thank you so much. Take care. Oh, I have power as a researcher. And so this is where, like, coming back to asking myself the hard questions and to seeing where I am in, like, this question, right? So how can we understand research relationships on the macro level? So for instance, I'm a part of a research group that we're looking at gender equity on the higher education internationally. And this is, I mentioned it in the presentation, but I think it got a little bit choppy. This is where looking at the UK, Kazakhstan, Nigeria, Morocco, and India. And we're looking at also the collaboration across researchers, and that we realized that just methodologically, right, we were trying to bring everyone's voices together across these countries, and yet, so global North and global South, and yet the power imbalances still remain. So simple things like, turns out that since the research is from a university in the UK, they are required to start all Zoom conferences. And so that leaves just a change of power, right? So they're the ones that can start the meeting. They're the ones who can end it. Nobody else can. Or the access to internet. So whether mine was going out, or we found that in particular, there were issues in Nigeria that we needed to add on additional funds to get enough Wi-Fi connection. Otherwise, we were literally losing the voices of of the country leads who were in the country that were trying to hear, but they would be dropping out. And so when people do drop out, right, there were also issues during COVID, right? Major things that happened, perhaps you remember, in India, where then our India team didn't have access to be able to conduct their research because nobody was in the universities anymore. And so they couldn't interview people, they couldn't send out surveys because everyone was dealing with this second wave of COVID. And so the inequities that come up, right, between the global North and global South, and how to then, really, then I ask myself, how am I don't want to reproduce inequities. And so thinking about these things, talking about them, and recognizing that we do want to counteract the power marginalization. And how do we do that? Part of that is becoming aware, talking in forums like this, finding solutions forward, right? The last question, right? Insider outsiderness. Is it important, right, that we take, which perspective and how do we move forward, and that we're actually, that I'm not trying to speak for other people, right? I'm not saying I know what it's like over there, wherever over there is, right? That could be next door or across the world. And that instead it is ultimately about the communities coming forward and helping get that platform, right? So platform for the Global South, for instance, well, what are we doing in higher education in terms of publications and how we are supporting publications, and this system that we have right now, that this push towards Q1, right, or quartile 1, or just certain particular journals as being reputable, and then that being the bar for hiring and for promotion. That system is unfortunately reproducing inequities. And so it's something that hopefully all of us can look at, right? We work in higher education, we work in these systems. How can we look to dismantle that and look at other ways to inform practice instead of just this one narrow process? Thank you for that question.
Yes, thank you so much.
We're close to just a few more minutes, but I don't know if somebody else has another comment.
Well, if there is no other comments, may I ask also some follow-up question on what you just mentioned now about social injustice and exercising power. We all understand that there's a difference between the Eastern mindset, Eastern philosophy, and Western mindset. What is just and what is right for the Western mind may not be a problem, or what is injustice, let's say, for the Western mind may not be a problem for the Eastern mindset, as they believe that better to keep status quo, not to change anything, you really came to this world to suffer, and they don't necessarily want to change anything. How you as a researcher can deal with such different mindsets when we come to understanding what is right? Because something that is right for me may not be right for the people, for our for our participants.
Thank you, Pavel, for that question. I think maybe you're getting to like the ideas, let's say, of, and let me know if I have this right, of perhaps, let's say, an ethnographer going into, a community that they're not familiar with, and their practices being different than, maybe how raising children, right? That, oh, you did whatever to that child that is different than I would do. That seeing those differences and how the researcher would intervene or not? Is that where you're getting to, or perhaps I've misinterpreted your question?
I'm talking more about the community research, empowering people. What we think should be done, what we think we need to liberate people, we need to empower them, we need to do something for the community. But does it mean they really need it? Or sometimes we just have our self-perception, we have perceptions already formed by our own philosophy, our own background,
right?
But then we just don't know really what people need unless we go into their reality, step into their shoes, and understand what is going on there.
Okay, so I think.
Do you believe? Can I just ask more? Do you believe there is a theoretical sensitivity in qualitative research?
Before, let me go back to this first one, right, to kind of answer this. Thank you so much, right? This is an important topic. And so kind of quickly, because I know that there'll be another session coming up. I think a key aspect of then thinking about, instead of, goes back to, we had in the chat about the researching with instead of researching at. And so I was trying to look back, right? Dr. Danielle LaJoy Davis talks about that. And I know she has a book about this intersectionality in education, and I talk about it as well, that, one way forward is transformational research. So whether we're talking about transformational mixed methods, transformational, qualitative research in general. And so so Donna Mertens is a great person to look at. Tony Onwegbuzi also does work along this route. And this is also the direction in which I'm working on building. And so in transformational research, in case you're not aware, what it is you continue to go back to the community. So maybe I come in and Donna Mertens has a great example of like going into a community. She was hired by an organization to come in to solve their, whatever was going on in one particular way. She came into the community, talked with people, realized that it actually had to do with the children who were there, ended up training another child in order to be able to conduct focus groups with other children, because children are more willing to speak with other children in that way. These are teenagers, so not in terms of ethics, this was quite appropriate in the steps. And then learned that there were other issues that were going on, that it wasn't what these external folks were thinking was the issue. And so that back and forth. And so this is one thing that we can also do in higher education or in other organizations. We think about ethics boards to allow for instance, iterative processes of ethics, where you would go back and that you would say, this is not my framework that I know I'm going to go in and I'm going to video, let's say, with everyone. And instead, you could say, I'm going to talk to the community and ask how they want to be interviewed or how they want to communicate. And then that would allow the opening for maybe people will say, well, I actually want to text. I actually want to, come together in a focus group. I want to come together in this way. And so there would be this relational inquiry and ways forward where we're, again, working with the community instead of on them and assuming that we know best, right? How can I know best about anyone else? I barely know best about me, right? And so if we can come from that standpoint of becoming more aware and working together, then asking these hard questions and asking them collectively, right? And realizing that we will need to reevaluate them as we go. There's not the one answer, and this is the way that it's always going to be. So thank you so much, Pavel, for bringing that question around, and for you all being here. It's really an honor.